Hello, church. I don't know if I can get good enough view for you, but this is a video from the Philippines saying hello. Ideally, I would be with you all today, but obviously I'm not. I'm probably, as you watch this, in the air, maybe getting close to landing somewhere in JFK and then finally returning to y'all. But today we want to get back in the zone for the book of Exodus. We've taken a break, since before Easter. I think Palm Sunday is where we deviated. So before all that, we'd covered chapters 1 through 4 of Exodus, and we want to return this week, review chapters 1 through 4, so that next week we can pick back up and start working our way through the book. So I want to just give a couple quick points, and then we'll have a handout. Hopefully it's already there at your tables, or your group leaders have it, to have a discussion together. So real quick, just backing up, the last two messages that we covered from Exodus, we covered chapters 1 and 2, where we said God's gracious faithfulness through sin allows us to walk in faith from sin. We talked about the nature of how God saves, delivering us from sin by actually entering into our broken situations and saving us through. And we challenged us to look for God's saving work through. So often we're looking for an exodus of escape, where God comes and delivers us outside of our issue. The salvation, the redemption comes from somewhere else, and our situation just goes away. But what we see in Scripture is God entering the brokenness to redeem. So then chapters 3 and 4, how is God going to save Israel? God calls imperfect people to be agents of His salvation and revelation. We serve as those agents through faith in God and His promise. And so as God's calling Moses, we're seeing an example of how God calls and how God uses people, in this case Moses, as the agents through which He's going to do that redeeming work, that salvation through. And that it's people of faith. That what mattered for Moses wasn't a great guy. The midwives that we saw in the first chapters were not great people. They all have flaws. It's faith that turns people into channels of God's saving work. So I want to just zoom out real quick. Big picture so far, where we've been, where we're going, and then I'll hand you off to your handouts with the questions for discussion. So we've in coming to Exodus, we've returned to the unfolding story that began in Genesis. It's a story of God's relationship with the world as a whole and humanity in particular. And the broad arc of the story is this. If we're going to really just what's the big Bible story that this is all coming together into? God is good and loving, and He's made a world that was meant to glorify Him by reflecting back His attributes through the world's flourishing within God's good design. And human sin is a departure from that design, and it issues with it in bondage and death to all humanity and subsequent toil to all of creation. That's the Genesis story. The first couple chapters lay that out. And so then what we see from there, going into Genesis towards Exodus, is God intervenes to restore and rescue the world from sin and death by the means of His covenant faithfulness. We see promises all through Genesis, and this concept as we go through Genesis has been expanded and clarified throughout the journey from Adam to Noah to Abraham and his children, taking on the shape of a gracious promise based on God's own faithfulness, not on our merit or worthiness. And it's a promise to deliver sacrificially and substitutionally through a Messiah. These are ideas that each have come and gotten developed and clarified. And at the end of Genesis, we've got Joseph being used as a substitutionary messianic figure to deliver his family from death in the world. That's a famine in that point. So that's the story and the clarity that's come. That's where we found ourselves when we washed up on the shores of Exodus. It's not a new story, but a continuation. Exodus pulls out the microscope and zooms in on the bondage and penalty of sin being broken by God's covenant faithfulness through a Messiah. So the ideas that were there in Genesis, we've now kind of zoomed in closer. And so while the book of Exodus is first Israel's story of God saving them, it's also everyone's story. We're all in bondage, in the bondage of our sin, justly condemned and helpless to save ourselves. Our chains, in some ways, are less visible than theirs. But in other ways, I mean, when you think of the brokenness that we taste in our daily lives, in our homes, our government, our media, even our daily commutes, we can hardly say that the chains of sin in our lives are obscure either. And so Exodus is Israel and every man's story. It's the story of God entering into our bondage and death and bringing new life through it and conquering it by imploding it in on itself and then leading us through the journey of letting go of our sinful past ways and stepping into His promised design or place for us. So while these first 4 chapters set the stage for how God will deliver Israel through Moses, they are no less a picture of how God saves us through Jesus. And so today we're going to walk together in our groups back through the first 4 chapters, grabbing these main points and making sure we're looking through them to Jesus as their fuller and more personal fulfillment. The question sheets that your group leaders have are on the tables. I don't know where you guys got them. This is a video, I can't see. We'll guide you through that process. So next week we'll resume our walk through the book as a whole. So go ahead and stop the video, go to your groups, and let's talk about how does God save us and deliver us through Jesus as pictured in Moses and the Exodus. God bless you guys. See you hopefully in a week or so.